Chapter 13. A Strange Story. "How shall we catch him?" Holly asked Pete, as the shadowy figure climbed higher on the ladder. The boy did not want to disturb the ceremony to ask for help, and his parents had moved several yards away. By the time they understood what was wanted of them, their thief would be gone. "I'll go after him myself," Pete said. "Oh, you mustn't!" Holly cried out fearfully. Two Indian men, standing off at a little distance, heard her and turned around. Quickly, Pete ran up to them and asked, "Will you help us catch a thief?" "Where is he?" Pete pointed, and immediately they raced off with the two Hollisters. When they reached the ladder, the man was nearly up to the first terrace. "Come down here!" Pete cried out. The man stopped a moment and glanced down, then started up again. "Do as the boy says," one of the Indians shouted sternly. At this command, the climber halted, then came down. When he arrived at the bottom, Pete and Holly gasped. The man was not Rattler at all, but Mr. Gross. "You Hollister kids again," he sneered. "What ails you?" I thought you stole my bracelet," Holly said, looking questioningly at him. "Your bracelet? What are you talking about?" the man asked. He wheeled toward the two Indians. "Next time, don't listen to these kids," he warned them, and started to walk away. But Pete stepped in front of him. "We've been looking for you to ask if you know where the man named Rattler is." "Rattler? I don't know anybody by the name of Rattler," Mr. Gross snarled. "You were talking to him in our hotel," Holly said. "Right after that, he took my sister Pam's bracelet." Mr. Gross gave an ugly laugh. "I remember now. He's just a beggar. He asked me for money, but I wouldn't give him a cent. I don't know anything about him." Mr. Gross strode away, leaving Pete and Holly open-mouthed with the two Indians. The men shrugged and went back. In a few minutes, the children rejoined their parents and told them what had happened. "It's very strange," said Mr. Hollister. "Why was the thief or thieves so eager to get hold of those particular bracelets?" "Maybe it was because they had belonged to Juan Deere," Pam suggested. "Possibly," her father agreed, "but I'm more inclined to think the bracelets may have some special significance." "What's that?" Sue asked. "Well, some things have special meaning or value to certain people," he explained. "Just what did the bracelets look like?" Pam said hers had a greenish-blue turquoise, and that the design was not like any she had seen before on Indian jewelry. It consisted of two coyote heads peeking out from some leaves. "Mine was like that too," said Holly, "and crossed arrows sort of mixed in with them." "They both have leaves, and they both have greenish-blue turquoise," Pete reflected. "Perhaps the thief is looking for a bracelet with one or the other for some reason." "Well, I don't care what the reason is," said Holly. "I want my bracelet back." "I want mine too," Pam added. "Say, do you suppose the special bracelet could have anything to do with the lost mine?" "How could it?" Pete asked, and Pam had no answer. Before the Hollisters left the Pueblo, they told Swift Eagle how much they had enjoyed their visit, but also explained what had happened. He promised to inquire among the Indians, and was sure none of the Yumatans had stolen the bracelet. "I guess we'll never see our jewelry again," Holly sighed as they walked to their bus. They continued to talk about the loss all the next day. As the family was finishing lunch, Pete said suddenly, "I believe Mr. Gross and Rattler are in cahoots." "In where?" Sue asked. "I mean, I think they're up to something together," her brother replied, smiling. "Don't you remember, Pam? You said you overheard Mr. Gross say, 'I'll give you the money later, Rattler.' That doesn't sound as if he didn't know Rattler." "You're right," Mr. Hollister agreed. "Then shouldn't we tell the police about Holly's bracelet?" Pete suggested. "Yes. Phone them, will you?" he asked, and then followed his wife upstairs. While the boy was gone, Swift Eagle came into the hotel looking for the Hollister children. He carried a covered basket, and when Pete returned, the governor smiled and said, "Pam and Holly, Your friends, Red Feather and Blue Feather, felt so bad about the stolen bracelets that they asked me to bring you something in place of them. And of course I couldn't forget you other children." "This is very exciting," said Sue, standing close to him as he seated himself in the lounging chair. He opened the basket and handed each of them a small package. The girls opened theirs first. The oohs and ahs which followed sounded just like Christmas morning in the Hollister house. "A beautiful new bracelet," Pam said, as she tried on the lovely silver and turquoise gift. "Oh, thank you so much." Holly squealed with delight when she saw one for herself, and Sue had a very small special bracelet which looked older than the others. "This one has been owned by my people many years," Swift Eagle explained. Pam said Sue must take extra good care of it. "I will. I'll love it with my whole life," Sue replied, touching it to her cheek. All the bracelets were more ornate than the ones that had been stolen. The silver work was scrolled in lovely cloud designs, and the turquoise inlays were the most beautiful they had ever seen. "And here are packages for the boys," Swift Eagle said. When Ricky opened his gift, he whooped, "Bow and arrow! This is a honey!" He held up a miniature silver bow and a tiny arrow for the others to see. "And it has a real bowstring, too," Ricky exclaimed gleefully. He fitted the nock of the arrow into the string and sent the little arrow flying a few feet. "What did you get, Pete?" Holly asked. Pete grinned as he pulled out a small silver eagle. "Hey, what's this between the eagle's claws?" he asked, looking up at the governor. "Examine it yourself," the Indian challenged him, and Pete pulled a long silver stick from the clenched claws. "Oh, it's a pencil," the boy declared. He turned the top, and the lead poked out of the other end. "This is nifty." "You can write cards to your friends back home," Pam suggested. "I'll do it right away," Pete grinned. He thanked Swift Eagle and hurried over to the hotel desk, where he bought postcards showing scenes of the Yumathan country. He would send them to Dave Mead and some of the other fellows back in Shoreham. Ricky, meanwhile, took his miniature bow and arrow and hurried to the garden of the hotel. He noticed Horned Toad near a clump of cactus. The boy whistled and stomped. When the toad did not move, he decided it was only a lifelike figure of one. "I'll pretend to shoot him," Ricky told himself. "I'm a big game hunter." He aimed the arrow and let fly. It landed in the sandy soil directly back of the toad. Then, to the boy's utter astonishment, the toad quivered and hopped into some rabbit brush. "Oh," Ricky gasped. "He's alive! Am I glad I didn't hit him?" Back in the hotel lobby, Pam, Holly, and Sue stood talking with Swift Eagle and admiring their new bracelets. "This time, nobody is going to take mine from me," Holly said determinedly, looking up at the kind Indian. "Will you tell us how they're made?" Pam asked, as she turned her bracelet over and over in the palm of her hand. "Of course," the Indian said, pleased that the girls were enjoying their gifts. He told how Indian silversmiths first pound out strips of silver. They use small hammers and chisels to cut the settings. "These have to be done perfectly so that the turquoise stones will not fall out," Swift Eagle said. He had no sooner said this than Sue exclaimed, "Oh, mine came out!" The lovely turquoise stone had fallen to the floor. As Sue bent down to pick it up, Swift Eagle said, "I guess this bracelet is so old that the setting is worn, but I'll repair it for you." He held out his hand, and Sue put the bracelet and turquoise into it. As the Indian examined them, he said, "You know there's an old legend that Indians used to send secret messages under the turquoise stones." "Really?" The question came from Pete, who had just returned from writing his cards and dropping them in the mailbox. "Were the messages in code?" Swift Eagle said he thought they must have been, because there was not enough room underneath the turquoise to write much. Suddenly, Pam's eyes grew wide, and she looked at her brother eagerly. "Oh, Pete, could it be that—" "You mean the stolen bracelets?" he said excitedly. "Exactly," Pam replied, Maybe the bracelet thief is looking for a message beneath some turquoise stone. Swift Eagle smiled at them. Two real detectives, I can see that, he said in praise. The secret messages I told you about were used by ancient Indians. I've never heard of the practice in modern times. Just the same, Pam said. People could still send messages that way. Do you suppose that the thief wanted the bracelets from the chaparral so he could look for a message? You surely are busy putting your clues together, Swift Eagle remarked. And look, he added, pointing to the door, here comes Officer Martinez. You might tell him how you've figured things out. The policeman approached, looking very serious. He merely nodded at the children and said, Swift Eagle, I'd like to speak to you. What is it? The governor asked him. We must speak in private, the patrolman added. Swift Eagle left the children and walked to the corner of the lobby with the policeman. In a few minutes he came back, a frown of worry on his face. Swift Eagle was so upset he could hardly talk. I had planned to entertain you and your parents this afternoon, he said, but now I won't be able to. Has something terrible happened? Yes, I'm afraid it has, the Indian replied. I must go with the policeman. Why? Pete asked. One of the rugs stolen from the chaparral, the governor said, has been found near my pueblo. The Yumatans are being blamed for the robbery.